Welcome to another video for anatomy and physiology. In this video we're going to be highlighting the digestive system. But before we get into the details of the digestive system, I want to give you a quick little story about a man with a hole in his stomach. That's right, a hole in the stomach. This is a story of Alexis St. Martin. So he was a Canadian traveler going through northern Michigan at the time when he was at a trading post and he was accidentally shot about 3 feet away with a shotgun. So he received major wounds, and an army doctor who was in town, was called to help him out, William Beaumont. William Beaumont in his writings mentions, uh, speaking of his injuries, that a portion of the lung as large as an egg was protruding out of his burnt tissue. In addition to that, he had a large hole that was large enough to receive my forefinger, as he writes. So you can imagine that the injuries that he received were quite substantial. He spent a lot of time in an infirmary at the public's expense, and they thought he was going to die, but he ended up living quite a while. And so the public got kind of tired of paying for him, so they were going to actually ship him out back to Canada when William Beaumont, at his own expense, decided to ask if he could stay. So he asked him to stay. Alexis Martin was actually fairly poor, so in exchange for room and board, they agreed. William Beaumont and Alexis Martin, they agreed that William would be allowed to experiment with Martin. Well, what I did mention is that the hole that he had where his stomach was visible was healing. There was a flap of skin that was healing over it, but it kept opening up. So he could actually look inside of his stomach, and William Beaumont took that opportunity and he made a deal with Martin, and the deal was for room and board. He would be able to perform experiments on him, and in total he performed 238 experiments. In his writings, William Beaumont mentions that I can look directly into the cavity of the stomach, observe its motion, and almost see the process of digestion. So hardly anything was known about the process of digestion up to this point. This was back in the 1800s. This particular time when the accident happened was 1822. So a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing, a lot of the basic facts for this video, for this subject, are in large thanks to William Beaumont and the research he did with Alexis Martin. So one of the experiments that he did, well, let me give you another quote real quick from his writings. I can pour water with a funnel and put in food with a spoon and draw them out again with a siphon. And that's actually precisely what he did. So he grabbed a piece of meat, he tied it on a rope, and he would lower it down into his opening of the stomach. And every hour, William Beaumont would take out the meat and he would write the data down as to how much of the digestion process was actually occurring per hour. I know, very gross, right? But this is a science class, so actually this was your response, right? Pretty cool. Well, so he performed 238 experiments, and a couple of the things that he found, and a lot of the other facts we'll discuss later on in the video, but one of them was hydrochloric acid is one of the main gastric juices that the stomach produces to digest food. Another one was that, as it turns out, the relationship between Beaumont and Martin wasn't very good. Beaumont wasn't very sensitive to Martin's current state, in that Martin didn't like the experiments. He felt very ridiculed and he felt embarrassed by it. He was kind of people made fun of him in that town because of what they called him literally the man with the hole in the stomach, and so he didn't like that. So their relationship was a bit strained, but they kind of needed each other. And so Martin was constantly under distress, or sometimes he was in more distress than others. And William Beaumont noticed that when Martin was distressed, that he didn't digest his food the same than when he was just feeling normal. So lack of digestion occurred when you're distressed, and as we know now, that's actually having to do with the sympathetic nervous system and how it interacts with the digestive system. But that's another topic for another day. So William Beaumont, he wrote his book in 1833 with his findings, and in 1853 he had an accident where he hit his head pretty severely and he died. And Alexis Martin died 28 years after Beaumont. He died very poor and senile. He toured the country through different medical schools, performing similar experiments to what William Beaumont did. And he died senile, alone, and he kept muttering in the writings for Martin. They would mention that he would keep mentioning that he had gone to Paris when in fact he had never been to Paris. And as it turns out, William Beaumont was always promising to take him to Paris, but never did. And apparently, Alexis Martin, he remembered that. So, in any case, this is the introduction for the digestive system, and let's go ahead and get started.